La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito, nada.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 14, Unmasking Imperialism, Exposing Imperialist Propaganda in Mainstream Media. Today, we're talking about Democrats and how they do not give a fuck about us, migrants, immigrant people, proud migrantes from the global south, how the Democrats hate migrants, how they participate in U.S. imperialism, which creates the migrant crisis, and how they pretend to care about our people and our struggles, and they only use it to further their pockets, further their political party's power, as exemplified by Kamala Harris and her recent trip to Mexico and Central America, where she made some really disgusting comments about migrants. We're going to be talking about that. And today on this beautiful Sunday, I'm glad to be joined by my good compas, my good homies out here in the West Coast, Karena, Acree-Páez, Matt Sedillo, and Ernesto Ayala. Let me just introduce them one by one. Karena is a founding member of Tele-Jaguar, a Chicano media collective, and has worked in numerous social justice campaigns. These include election integrity, NoDAPL, murdered missing Indigenous women, and in an organizational leadership capacity toward a broad front coalition for a revolutionary political party, not the Democrats, not the Republicans, a revolutionary independent third party. Professionally, she's worked in the field of immigration law for 20 years. How's it going, Karena?
I'm good, Ernesto. Thank you for having me.
No doubt, no doubt. And up next, Matt Sedillo, my homie, my brother out here in LA and Cali. Matt is also a founding member of Tele-Jaguar, as well as an author, essayist, and internationally renowned poet. He is the author of Mowing Leaves of Grass and current literary director of the DA Center of the Arts. Please go and buy his book, Mowing Leaves of Grass. Support our artists, support our people. I have yet to finish reading it, but it's an amazing work. You have to support this brother's work. He is one of the best poets and writers out there. And I actually have reached out to him for tips in terms of writing and just crafting stories, because this is a really talented dude, and I have mad respect for Matt. How's it going, brother? Hold on, let me unmute you. How's it going, bro?
Fantastic. Now that my voice can be heard, you know what I mean? Silence the people, Romero. Don't silence the people.
I'm silencing dissent. I'm going to have an article written about me. And if you haven't noticed, by the way, he has all those Post-its in the back, which maybe we can get into talking about later. But I thought it was a really cool tip that I got from him in terms of creating stories and having these Post-its that kind of help formulate a story. And he knows what he's doing. And if you have any questions about writing or want to read some really great work, definitely check out his stuff. And last but not least, my good comrade, my homie, my hermano Ernesto Ayala, who is also a founding member of Tele-Jaguar. Please like and share Tele-Jaguar's content. They've been constantly attacked on social media and censored for posting the truth and posting revolutionary content. Ernesto has worked in organized labor and is the pro-temp chair for El Partido Nacional de la Raza Unida. Got mad love for La Raza Unida, one of the most revolutionary Chicano parties out there, a really dope group of people. Ernesto is a proud Chicano and father who resides in Pacoima. Shout out to Pacoima, Sur Califatzlan. We are on Aztlan territory, Mexico Robado, indigenous territory as well. Ernesto, how's it going, brother?
Going good, brother. Going good. Thank you, man.
Good to hear from you. And it's really cool to be able to talk with y'all about this topic because the right wing has totally jumped on this topic. They have totally dominated the coverage of Kamala Harris in Central America and Mexico, but they've covered it from a perspective that's like, you see, this is why we need to crack down on migrants. This is why we need to build the wall. And there hasn't really been a Latino, socialist, communist, Chicano perspective on Kamala Harris's comments about migrants in Guatemala and as well when she traveled to Mexico. And it's important that we speak about this as well because we're coming at this not from a perspective of the traditional liberal conservative paradigm, which is the only paradigm we're presented with in mainstream media, where liberals and Democrats are portrayed as the good guys. They're like, migrants are welcome here, even though they're supporting imperialism abroad. Conservatives are painted as the people who don't want migrants, but then they have some really racist and xenophobic bullshit. And it's good to have this discussion because we're providing a third alternative to this false dichotomy that manifests itself as well in the Republican and Democratic two heads of one imperialist snake. And so what I want to do to start off, I have two clips I want to play for y'all. The first is a clip from 2019. This is Kamala Harris on Trump's immigration policies. You guys remember that guy, Donald Trump? He was president in from 2016 to 2020. And obviously I have a lot of disagreements with him. We all do. But it's just interesting to see how during that time period, 2019, not that long ago, Kamala Harris and the Democrats were portraying themselves as a party that was going to save immigrants, stand in solidarity with them, that was going to open their arms and be welcoming to them. And now that the Democrats are fully in power, we see how their script and their narrative has totally shifted. And they're not even trying to touch the border topic because they know that they're really failing on that. And so I want to play this clip again from 2019, Kamala Harris talking about Trump's immigration policies.
Where would you be today if this government told your immigrant parents that this country is full?
Not only me, Lawrence, you and probably most of this audience wouldn't be here. Let's be clear. Let's be clear. This is a nation founded by immigrants. Unless, you know, your history is of your ancestors being kidnapped and brought over on a slave ship, unless you are Native American, your people are immigrants. And the idea that we have a president of the United States that on this issue has vilified a whole group of people, and by the way, I believe it is because it is a distraction for him. He talks about that wall. He wants everyone to be preoccupied with his multi-billion-dollar vanity project. And it's because he's not dealing with the real issues impacting people in our country, like the fact that almost half of American families can't afford a $400 unexpected expense. And on the issue of immigration, he has also defied who we are morally and who we say we are to the world. We have always presented ourselves as being a nation of strength with strong arms, that when people are fleeing harm, we will embrace them. But look at what has happened with this administration. There are children who are fleeing murder capitals of the world. Let's be clear about this. Imagine a mother who makes a decision to pay a coyote to transport her child across the entire country of Mexico, facing unknown peril. She does that because she believes for that child to stay where they are is worse. But what does this president do? He virtually looks at those children and says, go back to where you came from. What do we have in this president? A policy that was about taking children, separating them from their parents, and calling it border security. No, that was a human rights abuse being committed by the United States government, and it is against the morals and the values of who we are as a nation.
So that's Kamala talking about, you know, we are a nation that we have to embrace these children. We have to embrace the migrants. Fast forward 2021, just a few days ago, Kamala Harris in Guatemala visiting and speaking with the people of Guatemala, speaking with the president. Here's what she has to say now, 2 years later.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur. But we, as one of our priorities, will discourage illegal migration. And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back.
So there we go, Kamala making a complete reversal, a complete flip-flop. And it's just really disgusting to see how she has tried to win people over, claiming she's pro-immigrant. The Democrats in general, it's not just Kamala, it's the whole Democratic Party. And it's important to see that contrast, because we're never going to see that in mainstream media. We're never going to see that side by side of putting her own words against her to hold her accountable. And clearly she's not being accountable for what she said in the past. So moving to compañera Karena, your thoughts, reaction to this latest comment by Kamala Harris? Hold on. Yep. Can't hear you. Can you hear us okay? Your screen, I think your Wi-Fi is kind of slow. Can you hear us? Let us know in the chat, by the way, if you guys can hear Karena. Nah, Ernesto and Matt, can you hear Karena? Nah, right? You guys can't hear her?
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, now I do. Yes, go for it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is it okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go on.
Yeah, it's really slow. Okay, so I would start by saying that what we hear from
maybe you could just use your audio. Orlando had a,
you hear an
good
echo?
suggestion.
I'm sorry,
Maybe
I hear an awful echo. No?
Nah, I don't hear an echo. Nah, you could go on though. Go for it.
Okay, all right. Well, okay, thank you. So I think first of all, as far as optics look, I think we can say that one of the most astounding things about Kamala Harris saying that is that here we have the second in command of the United States, who is grounding her response to Guatemalan migrants by speaking in direct contrast to the United States obligations as far as U.S. federal code and international treaty law. So her advice not to come is in direct conflict with U.S. federal immigration code and multiple international treaties. So we have a legal obligation. We have the top cop in the United States who is saying things that are or proclaiming a position by the empire as one that is flatly illegal. So aside from that, which is the most glaring conflict, I think, at an administrative level, it's important to look at who is responsible for creating the massive deportation machine that ICE is. Because if we look at the history of ICE, it was an agency, a relatively small agency that was started under George W. Bush. And under Obama, and Biden, we saw that ICE became the largest deportation machine this country has ever seen. And specifically, what I mean by that are a few key facts, such as 3 million deportations under Obama and Biden, which set a record. for deportations of any administration in the United States before. Secondly, under Obama-Biden, the ICE agency grew in terms of manpower, funding, and operations by 3,600%. And finally, under Obama, one of his final acts before leaving office was to sign a $1 billion contract with Correction Corporations of America to build a mass for-profit prison for women and children asylum seekers. So this kind of facts show that what is the intent of the Democratic Party? The intent is to mass incarcerate migrants for profit and to specifically target women and children, asylum-seeking applicants for profit. So that is, I'm not sure what can give a better picture of what the motivation is and what the material outcome is of growing ICE by 3,600% under a Democratic administration. And also I would point out that under Clinton, that's when all the militarization of the border occurred, forcing people to travel through the most dangerous areas of desert as a punitive measure. So that was meant to cause trauma, terror, and mass death for migrants as a way to deter them. So that's punitive. It's not in any way trying to help anyone. And then, couple that with what happens after they get here. And I can talk about some statistics in asylum and prepared to do that later on if you want. But after they get here, they're mass incarcerated for profit. So that is the Democratic picture. That is their attitude toward migrants. Traumatize them by foreign intervention, and when they get here, mass incarcerate them for profit, and specifically target women and children. So that's what their position is. That's what their objectives have been.
Definitely, and I like the fact that you're equally placing the blame on both the Republican and Democratic parties, because a lot of times, even among our own people, among our own communities, during the last election, when I was talking to my mom, she was like, who should I vote for? And she said something that was kind of interesting to me. She was like, the Democrats are the good guys, right? And I was like, no, but that's interesting that she says that, because that's a very common theme within the US, that the Democrats are the good people defending migrants, but they're equally just as responsible for a lot of the crimes of not only US imperialism that creates these crises, but profiting from locking up children in ICE facilities with the Corrections Corporation of America and all these prison industrial complex that is impacting migrant women and children. It's like a good cop, bad cop scenario where even though one cop is trying to sweet talk you and trying to get you to speak up, he's equally just as bad. He's still a cop. He's just going to give that information over to the really rough and rugged cop that's going to fuck you up later on anyway. So I'm glad that you're pointing that out. Compañero Matt, your response to Kamala Harris's recent comments.
I think that it's very interesting when we talk about this game of good cop, bad cop, because it is important to remember that they have reversed roles in the past. So it's a lot more fluid. It's the roles. I mean, it's probably the same at a precinct. I mean, it's my turn to be the bad cop. It's your turn to be the good cop. But throughout American history, these parties have switched roles. I mean, if you look at the Dixiecrats, what we know as the Dixiecrats, that was kind of a holdover from a time where the Democratic Party were the more, were the more bloodthirsty, or the more, at least rhetorically more bloodthirsty. It's a holdover from that period of time, and I guess they're still trying to purge themselves of that, or I don't really know how that's going for them, but like that, it does come from a time period where this, you have to remember, this is the party founded by Andrew Jackson. And so, like, I really want to get into kind of a little bit of that history in my opening comments here. Is that, and I want to make sure that this isn't used for any nefarious purposes, like people will cherry pick and be like, you see, blah blah blah. So it's important to remember the Republicans are also
right, of course,
for the wolves in the forest. I mean, if you look at the history of the Republican Party and what they've meant to our people, we're talking about William McKinley, who was part of like grabbing Cuba and during the Spanish American War to take the Spanish Empire and absorb it himself. Theodore Roosevelt, who played a big role in that. Herbert Hoover with the Mexican Repatriation Act. Dwight D. Eisenhower with Operation Wetback. Ronald Reagan with those horrible wars in Central America. Bush with the war against Panama. Trump, obviously, all the things he did and said, and the horrors under his administration. But when you turn it around with the Democratic Party, here's what you find. The predecessor to the Democratic Party was the Democratic Republicans, who later became the Democratic Party. They kind of split into factions, and the more powerful one became the Democratic Party. But one of the first major one of the presidents of the Democratic Republican Party was James Monroe, who established something called the Monroe Doctrine. And the Monroe Doctrine is the doctrine by which the United States of America, has proclaimed its right to an imperial claim over all of the Western Hemisphere, and that European powers need to stay out, and that they would be the ones to handle this. They would be the ones to, quote unquote, carry the white man's burden. That phrase would come later, but that was like the concept of the Monroe Doctrine. Later, you have James Polk, who waged the Mexican-American War, stealing half the territory of Mexico. Later, you have Woodrow Wilson. And this seems like ancient history, but if you lived in the time of Woodrow Wilson, James Polk would not be that ancient of history. And if you lived in the time of James Polk, James Monroe wouldn't have been ancient history. So you have Woodrow Wilson, who waged a number of wars in the Caribbean and Central America. Later on, you have JFK, who almost destroyed the entire world in a conflict with Cuba. Right. Then you have Bill Clinton, who actually did build a wall. And in his horrific rhetoric. Then after that, you have, and many of the policies that had. Then you have Barack Obama conducting coups in Honduras and a number of other things. And of course, which leads us today to Joe Biden. And so Joe Biden, who was instrumental in years and years and years of all these things, who has said that he was not interested. Who said that, and this is not just a question of the policies, it's also a question of the supposed difference between the parties, which is the difference of rhetoric, right? The difference of these you saying these horrible things, and it's psychologically affecting us, and it's a form of psychological warfare, and that's what makes Republicans worse. Well, okay, but at the same time, the Democrats have their own series of horrific statements, which also are terrible. Like, don't come, that's terrible. We come Kamala Harris, which is terrible. But Joe Biden has a history of these comments as well. I mean, Joe Biden has talked about, I voted to build a fence instead of a wall. Things of this nature. And if you look at Barack Obama in his own book wrote that it disgusts him to see Mexican flags in the streets. That it made him sick to see Mexican flags being waved in American streets. So Barack Obama was very much, part of this Yankee Doodle kind of vision, kind of a rainbow coalition Yankee Doodle thing. Like, there is no white America. I mean, let's be honest. What made Barack Obama so popular was so much of white America was that he said that there was no black America. There is no white America. There's no black America. There's no Latino America. There's no Asian America. There's only the United States of America. That was the first big statement Barack Obama made that made him this kind of like a shining, political rising, rock star, rising like a comet to the front. That speech where he said that, and making variations of that speech and variations of saying that like America is great, America's for everyone, and anyone who criticizes America is they're just not with the program. They're not seeing it the right way, and this is the right way to see it. No white America, no black America, no Latino America, no Asian America, only the United States of America. So that's what made Barack Obama popular. We also have to remember that Barack Obama, in his own book, wrote to see Mexican flags in the streets made him like sick to his stomach. So like that's the kind of that's what we're dealing with, and also have to remember that during Barack Obama's presidency, at a time when Joe Biden was second in command, there was incidents with an undocumented young girl who brought a note to the Pope about her parents and the suffering of her parents. And it was a beautiful moment, and I'm not really so sure what the popes can do for her, and there's a whole history with that. But, it was a beautiful sentiment, beautiful moment. This girl's bringing this note. And so it causes it becomes a national story. They invite her to come to the White House to spend some time with Barack Obama and Joe Biden. But they do not allow the parents in the White House because they are undocumented. So because they are undocumented, they cannot sully the grandeur of the steps of the White House, and that's the kind of things that we're told in this country by both the Republican and Democratic parties. So again, I don't want this used for nefarious purposes. Someone chopping up my words and saying like, no, I mean the Republicans are also the wolf that stalks the prey in the night. But we have to understand, for those who don't want to understand, the scope of the problem. The scope of the problem is that it is both parties. The scope of the problem is that it's an entire system. And therefore, you cannot win by voting for the one that doesn't sound as mean at the time.
Exactly.
That's not going to work.
Exactly. And I think even on the foreign policy front, we can even talk about how the Democrats under Barack Obama, so much damage was done under his administration, bombing the crap out of Libya, killing Muammar Gaddafi, who was the recognized president and leader of that country, Libya having the highest life expectancy on the African continent, and creating a huge migrant crisis that we didn't necessarily see on our shores here in the US, but huge amounts of Libyans, especially Black Libyans from the South, who were executed, and those who survived were forced to migrate to Europe. And many of those who stayed were sold as enslaved people on markets by these radical Wahhabis. And that was all a product of Democrat foreign policy, creating a huge migrant crisis, as well as airstrikes in Somalia and Eastern Africa, the Horn of Africa, that also created a huge migrant crisis there that is never talked about. The fact that the U.S. expanded AFRICOM at its largest size during that time period, bombing and droning the crap out of people in Africa, Afghanistan, and the color revolution style protests that the Democrats supported in Iran and Venezuela. And during Obama's tenure is when a lot of the sanctions ramped up against Venezuela. And during that time period is when a lot of Venezuelans were forced to leave Venezuela, go to other countries because of the economic warfare going on. And so it's interesting to kind of put those two together, the domestic and the foreign, to really see how the Democrats really are complicit. And just like Compañero Matt said, right, obviously the Republicans play a major role in this, and this shouldn't in any way, because that's what a lot of Democrats will tell you. They're like, look, are you like working for the Republicans? You know, this is just favoring them. But it's like, no, like we have to get out of this false dichotomy and false binary that one or the other is going to save us. And the problem, like you said, Matt, is both of them. I think you said that pretty well. Compañero Ernesto, your response to Kamala Harris. Yes.
Okay. Well, my response to Kamala Harris, I'm going to have to water it down. But, you know, I mean, I think first of all, I think the first thing we need to keep in mind when approaching anything regarding the United States, and particularly the United States on our continent, is that the United States is a foreign imposition on our land. So their rule, in particular here in the Southwest, what we call Asylum, is illegitimate. So I think that's the first thing, because we need to frame the argument from our point of view, not from their point of view. You know, from our point of view, from reality, this was never a nation of immigrants. It's a nation of oppressed and internal colonies, and that's what they've done to us. All, you know, other raza de migrants here, they join our nation. You have the African nation, you have Puerto Ricanos, you have, you know, the different native nations collectively under the rule of the United States. So to let them frame the argument for us that this is a nation of immigrants and that, you know, it's always been welcoming of immigrants and whatever, no, I mean, get out of here with that. That's a bunch of bull, and we know it. You know, they allowed immigrants from Europe because they needed more settlers to you know, bulk up their numbers and try to decimate ours. But that's it. You know, they never wanted us here in the first place. That's why they invaded us, to kick us out. You know, so I think that's the first thing we need to recognize with that their rule is illegitimate, and who they claim to be as an immigrant or a migrant, you know, is completely false. Our people have been migrating up and down, left to right, you know, north, south, east, west, and everything in between for thousands and thousands of years. You know, and to have, you know, these people from the United States government tell us, you know, we're a nation of immigrants, and unless you're from a specific tribe right here, then you're also an immigrant. No, man, you know, you don't get to decide for us. We decide for us. You know, so I think that's something important, brother. And that's in the history books. That's in, you know, archaeology, everything. You know, we're a part of this land just as much as our other indigenous relatives and raza. You know, because that's also raza. And, you know, let's not forget, of course, obviously, that the Southwest was invaded by the United States when it was Mexico. It was Mexico. Whether people are in favor of that or not, that's not what we argue. But it was invaded by the United States, and their rule, their point of view, their society, their culture forced on us. So I think we need to frame it first of all from our point of view. So okay, so they're obviously here, so we have to deal with them, right? So I think the thing is, like the compañeros were saying, is seeing the complete hypocrisy of how someone like Kamala Harris can, when they're campaigning, oh yeah, she's all in favor of or more, she's against, extremely right-wing attacks and all that. Supposedly, they use all this rhetoric like, oh yeah, we want them to come in. And then when they get in power, they do exactly what those people were saying, only they frame it in another way, or it's coming out of the mouth of a non-white woman, And so now it's supposed to be different, but she's saying the exact same stuff in a more polite manner that Trump or one of these other people were saying, because they're saying the same things, and it's like, compañeros were saying as well, I mean, Clinton signed NAFTA. We want to go back a little bit. Clinton signed NAFTA. What did that do? That caused more economic havoc in Mexico, forcing more people to leave the campos because they were forced out, go to the cities in Mexico or come to the cities in Aslan, what we call Aslan, forced to migrate. Now they had to go across the Sonora Desert, ¿verdad? Because they built the wall. This was Clinton that built the wall. Before there was even a wall, he built it. Before Trump even announced the wall, he built the wall and forced thousands and thousands of people to go through the desert and die. And they still find mass graves, or they still find bodies, or whatever's left of a body out there, ¿verdad? From all this time, from the mid-90s to now, and what, is it a coincidence that now 11, 12 years ago, the United States overthrew the government of Honduras, overthrew the government of Haiti, and now, there's like this mass exodus of people, of raza coming from those countries to over here. Is that a coincidence? No, man. That's all the doing of United States imperialism, on the rest of our continent, and forcing our people to have to leave their home, but that just to survive. And have to leave their homes, not because they're corrupt governments, but because they're governments that are imposed on them by the United States. Because these people, they take the whole argument and they manipulate it, a su conveniencia, to their convenience. And they'll say, crap like that, like, the Democrats know what they're doing, man, and they know that people's consciousness is growing. So they admit, oh yeah, people are moving because their economic well-being or their political stability, the stability of the country, or crime and all that is not good. That's true, but they just try to now throw it upon like it's a cultural thing of the people there, or it's just the government. They're just corrupt. Like they're out of nowhere, they're corrupt, and these bad, crazy people get into power out of nowhere. Those bad, crazy people were imposed by you, literally. They were imposed by the United States, overthrowing democratically elected governments in both cases, Honduras and Haiti, or you had economic policy forced on them, NAFTA, all these, things. I forgot the one for the Caribbean, what they call it, that just throws their economies into havoc, but they exploit them even more with neoliberal policies. So, I mean, that's, we have to frame the argument from our point of view, from the point of view of the people, ¿verdad? And it's just disgusting the way they try to, both parties represent the same people and they do the same things. Only one of them has a little bit more brains, and they try to say in a more polite way, ¿verdad? Which is good for them, pero it causes the same things to the people, to the raza or whoever, is forced to migrate, or their countries are thrown into chaos, ¿verdad? That benefits these people, ¿verdad? And not the people that have to escape and go through the deserts and jungles, or hostile areas, ¿verdad? Just to try and survive, ¿verdad? But they're just, I mean, they try to manipulate the whole argument to their benefit. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind, ¿verdad? When we talk about this whole issue. And yeah, I mean, that's just toning down what I would like to tell Kamala Harris.
I'm sure you would have a lot of kind words for her. But dude, that's such a great point, man, about the Democrats being, shout out to Black Agenda Report, by the way. They have some really great coverage. They call the Democrats the more efficient wing of U.S. imperialism, the more efficient colonizers. And that's exactly right. They have a better PR campaign, a better media apparatus and a better media operation that they control, and they use mainstream media at this point, like NBC, ABC, CBS. They are basically controlled by the Democratic Party. They repeat their talking points. Fox is obviously Republican and a few other outlets, but it seems like the Democrats have their branding and media on point, especially with Hollywood as well. And they're trying to make everything in media seem so progressive. They're trying to put more Latinos and African people in representation to make us feel like there's no more racism, like we're all included now. And it's complete BS. But just like you said, compañero Ernesto, they know what the fuck they're doing, and they're very efficient at it. By the way, shout out to everybody who's watching and listening. Char Darling, Darrell Davis, Dust James, Orlando, Deborah Rodriguez, Francisco. Thanks for watching and listening. Please watch and share Tele-Jaguar's content. They have some really good stuff. Follow them on social media. They've been repressed a lot on social media, probably more than a lot of other groups I've seen, because of them critiquing the Democrats and the Republicans and speaking truth to power, especially for the Chicano people. But going back to you, compañera Karena, I would like for you to paint a picture for us about what the situation is like at the border. I know you mentioned you have some statistics information, but what is life like right now? What are people experiencing? And especially when it comes to people being locked up, what is happening there right now?
Okay, so I can give you a bit of a picture of what, because this is immediately, what the immigration process looks like is immediately irrelevant to what we see what the effects are, and the disparity between how, asylum decisions are reached by nationality, because there's a huge disparity there, irrespective of material facts of the case. There's a disparity on who gets approved, who gets denied. When you come, the way the immigration law is now for asylum. Now people talk about, we'll use terms refugee and asylee interchangeably, but they're actually different. So the refugee is someone who is outside the country, and an asylee is someone who's presenting themselves for admission into the country or who is already in the country. So there's two ways to apply for asylum. One is at a Class A port of entry, which is a specified border entry, right? And the other one is from within the United States. So the latter is someone that in immigration law we call an iwi, entered without inspection. So the U.S. federal code and international law recognizes that at the border, people are allowed to make an asylum application at the border for entry, meaning they have to come face to face with a Customs and Border Protection officer, and they have to display credible fear. And the display of credible fear and the criteria which the adjudicator, the CBP officer applies to that person is done face-to-face based on whatever their interaction is, whatever they think they want to do. They want to let them in, they can. And so just to give you an example of what the immigration process would look like and the incredible burdens that are placed on people, first of all, people are come to the border to do things the legal way. We always hear that echo, well, do things the legal way, just apply and then it will work out for you. Well, they are doing things the legal way. They are presenting themselves at a Class A port of entry for admission, and they are complying with international law and U.S. federal code by doing that. The denial of the United States is, so the colonizer nation, aside from the fact that we, can look at it from one perspective and say, well, it's a legitimate government, your borders are legitimate, that's part of our perspective. But then even from within the colonizers, system of inverted totalitarianism, where all we have are these democratic institutions that are just shells of democratic institutions, really, and they're all controlled by powerful international corporations. That's who's controlling all of them at this point. But when you present themselves at the border, they have to make a credible fear. So you're coming, people don't realize there's a huge amount of discretion when you're coming. Think of what is the perspective, what is the bias of a Customs and Border Protection officer who see these people every day, and they hate dealing with these people every day. Literally, the asylees applicants' life is in their hands. They have to show, quote unquote, credible fear to a CBP officer. And at that very moment, the CBP officer can decide whether to let them in or not. This has resulted in, many people who are literally, camping in refugee camps in Tijuana. So they are, and obviously they have no work authorization to be in Mexico too for these lengthy periods of time when, again, they are supposed to be admitted according to U.S. federal law, but they're not. So then they're like re-traumatized. They are left in even more vulnerable positions. So they're escaping from the effects of U.S. imperialism in their home country. Then they get to the border and they are forced to stay in extremely unsafe conditions where they have no work authorization for extended periods. So how could, I'm coming to seek asylum, then I end up in another country where I have no work authorization. I'm expected to somehow maintain my family for months and months and months. No, that leads to more, people resorting to desperate things and desperate economies. And those are the kind of traumas that exist in these border camps. Now, if somebody does get into the country and they're allowed to seek asylum, these are some of the barriers that they're up against when they come in. Now, asylum decisions by nationality vary greatly. And I'll give you a very brief picture of some statistics of what that looks like. So, for example, the top 3 nationalities with the largest asylum denial rates are Honduras with 87.3% denial rate of asylum applications. Guatemala is second with an 85.8% denial rate, followed by Mexico, which is at 85% denial rate. So to the people that say just come and do it legally, just, they have this idea of some fictional line where people just go and wait in line. Irrespective of the material facts of the case, they still have these horrific denial rates when they do try to do things the right way. And to give you an idea of, and also I think a lot of people in the U.S. don't realize that people end up detained in for-profit carceral systems for years and years and years while they're waiting for asylum applications to go through. And so what this really looks like for people is that they come in, they try to apply the right way, they can end up getting incarcerated for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, only to have their asylum applications denied after that many years because they're faced with these horrific rates. Now, in terms of what does the immigration backlog look like? I can, people say, well, people have no concept, I think most Americans have no concept of how many years this can take. There is a massive backlog at the moment with asylum applications. So as the last numbers from December 2020 show, that there are 350,000 asylum applications pending at the USCIS. Now, that's just one office. Some asylum applications are processed at the Executive Office for Immigration Review. Now, that office, as of December 2020, had 570,000 asylum applications pending. So if you combine those two numbers, you have almost 1 million asylum applications pending.
Damn.
And Congress does not fund immigration court. Filing fees fund immigration court. So the system, for people that say come and do it the right way, their system is set up to deny asylum to people who are coming and trying to do it the right way. So I think those figures, kind of tell the story of what the biases are when people do come in. With 1 million asylum cases pending, of course it's going to take years and years and years. And then there is so much, so much bias already in the system. I mean, it's been documented. The Intercept published an expose confirming about how some asylum judges were strategically placed with 100% denial rates. So, it's a system is set up for people not to have any success, to suffer, to compound the suffering again and again and again.
That's wild. That's crazy to hear. And I'm not surprised, to be honest with you. It's just really disheartening because the people who are being most impacted by that are our sisters and brothers in Mexico and Central America and Haiti and other parts of Latin America and the world who are fleeing U.S. imperialism. I personally have seen for myself what that is like from beginning to end. In 2012, I visited Honduras, where my family's from, and I got a chance to meet with a leftist organizer, a communist revolutionary. Her name was Margarita Murillo. She was a really dope person. She was a leftist, socialist, campesino organizer. She was somebody who worked very closely with Berta Cáceres, who also was murdered in 2016, another indigenous activist. And Margarita Murillo, she was somebody who was on the front lines of the struggle against the coup regime, the U.S. propped up government in Honduras defending indigenous lands from neoliberal companies that were trying to come in and privatize and take over. And Margarita Murillo was murdered in 2014. And her children, who are also activists, who are still organized, I still know them today, they obviously had to flee the country because they were getting death threats. People were hitting them up like, yo, you guys are next. We're going to kill you, if you don't leave the country. Obviously, they had to leave. They left. They went through Mexico. In the case of one compañera that I still talk to that I'm cool with, she has a daughter with cerebral palsy, so she had to do that whole voyage with her daughter who, had a disability. And they got to the border. They were locked up. The next time I saw them was a few years later, 2015, around there, 2016, more like 2015. Right before I moved to LA, this is in New York, and I went to court and I saw them with the orange locked up. And the time before that, I was chilling with them at the beach in Honduras. We were eating fish and plátano and talking. We were with their mom, who was the organizer. I see them a few years later. Their mom was murdered. They're locked up in an immigration court. And it's just really sad. And it just really pissed me off to see that full circle, how really good people who are just trying to fight for their lives and defend themselves and resist a U.S.-backed violent government are being locked up and going through this process. And even today in Los Angeles, there's so many people who are coming from these countries, from Mexico, Central America, with so many similar stories. I can't tell you of how many stories I've heard of people who have gone through that. And so it's just really disheartening because, we hear these numbers and a lot of times we don't put a name and a face to it. But to know these people personally, to interact with them, it's a whole different situation. But moving to you, compañero Matt, obviously you're somebody who has done a lot of work, a lot of great work around chronicling police brutality, chronicling ICE raids and immigration, especially here in California, because people outside of the U.S. have this illusion that California is like this liberal hippie utopia. It's Democratic run, so everyone's fine. But there's a lot of shit that goes on with police, not only here in LA County, but also with La Migra, with the raids, the crackdowns that impact immigrant communities. For our viewers and listeners who are living in other countries, why don't you give us a sense of what life is like for immigrants here once they do get here, the quote unquote lucky ones who are able to make it? What is life like living in fear here for them?
Well, I would extend that a little bit to talking not just about people who are migrants. I mean, the fear of you grew up in this area, whether you were born here or not, or whether you're born within the continental United States or not. As a kid, you're going to be insulted. You're going to be called a wetback. You're going to be called an illegal. I mean, something's going to happen to you. So that's just that someone like gets mad at you and they want to say something racist. That's what they're going to say to you. So it does color all of us. But at the same time, there's a certain amount of I don't know if we want to call it privilege, but there's a certain amount of ability to walk through knowing that, like, if I get arrested, I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to go through the U.S. Carceral system is going to suck, but I'm not going to get arrested for jaywalking and then get deported to somewhere that I've never even been and I don't even know, just dropped off in the middle of the desert somewhere. That's not going to happen to me, most likely, anyways. There are cases where that has happened, but like that's most likely not going to happen. So there's a difference, right? So I don't want to say there's no difference at all, but there is a kind of this fear that kind of like permeates the entire community. And many of us who are here, who are born here, or whatever, families are mixed and blended. So it could be like, yeah, I'm going, but dad's going to go. I mean, like, what kind of life is that, right? So, but specifically to people who are undocumented, who are living here, who are across these imposed borders, life is very scary. I mean, like you have ICE raids that can happen anytime. It can happen at businesses. They can happen in your homes. There's a band called Santa Cecilia, and they put out a song about one goes to work and one stays home, and then the other one never returns. Right? It's really, really, really heartbreaking song. But that really does actually color like what is actually going on out here. I mean, this is what's going on. If you look at just the landscape, just the economic landscape of California, you see that something we all kind of know, right? Which is that like we see who's working. And we see who's doing the jobs that like make other jobs possible. We see who labors, right? So this is really, again, for everyone watching across the world, and this is not just a question. It's a question of national liberation. All national liberation questions are economic, but it really is this really kind of the heart and soul of a colonial proletariat here in the United States, particularly in Southwest, and increasingly across America, increasingly in places like Oklahoma City as well. So, but here in California, it's terror all day. It's 24/7 state of terror. And I would encourage people to look. I remember when Guardian was putting these things together, talking about which were the most murderous counties. The most murderous county in America for 2 years running was Kern County, which is where Bakersfield, and it's kind of just getting into the Central Valley. It's moving up into the Central Valley, leaving Los Angeles and going into the Central Valley, and it's brutal. I mean, it's a brutal reality, and that the majority of people getting killed out there are Raza. So I mean, that's what's really happening, and so. There's a guy named Roberto Sidney Rodriguez, and I would encourage people to check out his work because he's actually looking at that. He thinks that there's a dramatic undercount because anytime you see these things, it shows like the different whatever, and it's labeled as Latino, Hispanic, whatever, and it shows that it happens at a certain rate over the general population, a certain rate over the white population. But he thinks that that's a dramatic undercount because it just doesn't make sense, because there was years when it was Kern County that was the killingest county, and there was other times when it went back between Kern County and Albuquerque County, right? So that doesn't if you know anything about these areas, you know who's getting killed. So this doesn't make any sense that this would somehow be where. And there was a point in time when New Mexico. Or Albuquerque, not New Mexico, but Albuquerque was actually killing as many people. The cops were killing as many people as New York.
Wow.
You know, I mean, like not per capita, no, as many people in an area of like 500,000 as opposed to 8 million. That's how bad the situation had gotten. So there has to be a dramatic undercount for what's actually going on. When we try and look at the statistics, but when you live it, when you experience it, you just know it. I mean, and again, to bring back history, there's a straight line between this and like the Texas Rangers. There's a straight line between this and the California Rangers. There's a straight line between this and the Arizona Rangers. There's a straight line between all this and that whole ranger system that was put in place. And it was put in place for a reason. It was put in place to round up the tribal people, the Mexicanos, what they called Mexicans of Indians of Mexican descent. And you look at California law, there's a pretty straight line between what was called the Greaser Act and the Foreign Miners Tax, which were all these laws that were put in place to basically dispossess people, and to the laws that we see today with gang databases, where you find infants on this database. You find, supposedly hardened, confessed gang criminals who are like 6 months old. So obviously this is just nonsense, right? It's not real. But the gang databases, the gang injunctions, all these things that affect the Black community as well, disproportionately, and other colonized peoples, like some Pacific Islanders as well. I mean, a lot of other people get targeted by these things as well. But the history of this in this part of the world, it comes from that Manifest Destiny history. It comes from the gold rush. It comes from that period, and more broadly, it comes from 500 years of colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. But specifically, it comes from that kind of. When we talk about California, it comes from that period. Those laws, the Greaser Act, it goes straight down today to the gang databases, to all these kinds of things. So that's the world we're looking at. The point I didn't get a chance to make earlier, though, was that I wanted to make also, just it's a thing I was talking about earlier, was that also in 1920, Woodrow Wilson was president during the passage of what's called the Jones Act. And the Jones Act is the Merchant Marine Act, which is what has hobbled Puerto Rico since the 1920s. I mean, it's colony, but it's been hobbled to even be able to grow its own merchant industry by an act in 1920, which Woodrow Wilson was president during place, and then Warren Harding was the one that actually really kind of carried it out. So you see these things going hand in hand. So it's not just a question of like, well, who started, who did it, who technically can we put this on? No, I mean, like, okay, Bush. I started during Bush, but it was expanded during Obama. The Jones Act passed during Woodrow Wilson, but it's enacted during Warren Harding. CAFTA starts with George W. Bush, but Dominican Republic gets added to CAFTA during Obama. So I mean, it's a relay race. They're handing the thing off to each other. So there's no way of even distinguishing the two. Just to be honest, there's no way of even distinguishing these two parties. And that's kind of that. I think that's a really important point to add to this. It's not just to say. I mean, the reason people ask us all the time, why do you talk so much about the Democrats? Well, we talk more about the Democrats and Republicans because the Democrats are fooling more good people, or people we are assessing to be potentially good people. So if you're not a good person, if you're a total piece of shit, well, just tell us now, and we can just start talking about the stuff. But the reality is, the reason why we talk so much more about the Democrats and Republicans is because we kind of understand that, like, well, if you're drawn to that, then you're just a piece of shit, and that's just the way it is. So we're not. Why would we? Whatever. But like, so that's kind of why we end up talking more about this, because it seems like this group of people has more people fooled. And so that's kind of why we end up talking about it. But if we actually want to address reality, the reality of it is that it's not a competition; it's a relay race. I mean, they're passing the baton to each other. They're not competing with each other. They're just carrying out the same program. I mean, they have a slight competition based on the egos of individuals who want to win and lose. I mean, just like everything else in life. But between the parties themselves, no.
Yeah. Dude, that's such a great analogy. I'm going to start using that, the relay race. I think it's a great way of explaining it, because both sides are complicit in mass deportations, locking up families, imperialism. And like you said, I'm glad you pointed that out. We focus a lot on the Democrats because they're the ones who are fooling a lot of people. And it's important that we open the eyes of our people to see that the Democrats are just as complicit in this crime. Compañero Ernesto, obviously you're in La Raza Unida, which is a revolutionary party, a Chicano nationalist party, a socialist party. I want to ask you a little bit about how you decided to become a part of that movement, because obviously it's not a Democratic party, it's not a Republican party, but somehow you as a Chicano, as a revolutionary, you made your way, you radicalized yourself to a point where you were able to see past the bullshit of both parties and join this movement, join this party. What made you get to that point, and what advice would you have for other revolutionary Chicanos or Latinos who are also trying to radicalize their family and their relatives to join third parties, to join non-Republican or Democratic parties? So tell us a little bit about your experience with your radicalization.
Thank you. I gotta say, I was, or I have been in a situation which is not common. I did grow up in the Chicano movement. My father was the chair of the Partido La Raza Unida before. I think the difference though that for myself and my experience was that my father didn't do the work he did and keep us separate from it. He included us in it. We were a part of it. We were there in the meetings, and as in my sister and myself as children, my mom as well. Like he would include all of us. It just became a part of the family. The thing too is that my father, he became a teacher, but our roots are working class. We're workers. All my family, they're all workers, Chicano proletarians. My dad comes from that. My grandfather was that, and a bit lumpen también a veces. Pero we're proletarian, ¿verdad? So, but my dad, he because he was radicalized, ¿verdad? Because he understood his commitment was to his people. He never moved out of the neighborhood that he grew up in, and that's where I grew up, And so I was able to interpret all these things I was learning, ¿verdad? Organically, because I was seeing them in my real life with people in my family, with friends, with everybody else. The whole culture that I grew up in. Literally, not just what I read in books or whatever, but I grew up in the barrio, in San Fernando, in Pacoima, in between there, ¿verdad? Which are they're historic working class Chicano barrios, a bit African también, Pacoima at least a little bit. So that's the environment I grew up in. So I was able to interpret things from that perspective, ¿verdad? It wasn't like my father kept us away from it and did his own thing, or I grew up with another set of values by just him being like, you do your thing. I can't impose. Some parents think I can't impose on you. Then do you really believe what you say? So it wasn't an imposition. It was a exposure to the truth, ¿verdad? And coming from the same point of view, like I didn't grow up thinking I was any different, ¿verdad? Sure, my dad was a teacher, ¿verdad? Pero all my tias, my tios, they were workers. Everybody around me was workers, or even lumpen proletarian, ¿verdad? You saw how the way the police interacted with the community, including my dad and including myself, ¿verdad? Growing up, how majority of my friends didn't graduate from high school, ¿verdad? As a matter of fact, my high school had, I think in all of LA, had either the biggest or one of the biggest dropout rates, ¿verdad? And I remember having friends that didn't even know how to read, man, so and at that age, in high school age, they were there in high school, it was experiencing life through that point of view, like I am a worker. And still right now I am a worker, and I'm completing my education, but I don't see myself as anything different because this is my people. And I chose to also live in Pacoima. I bought my house here, ¿verdad? When I was able to buy a house, I bought it here in Pacoima, in the barrio, because I feel I belong here. I don't belong anywhere else. But I'm not saying if you don't live in Pacoima or in the barrio, you're wrong. But I'm saying, as to myself, I feel I belong here, ¿verdad? This is my people. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, ¿verdad? So I think that's part of it, ¿verdad? It was very organic, ¿verdad? It wasn't like something I just learned or whatever. It came through, lifelong experiences. I do remember being a kid, that there were certain things throughout my lifetime, ¿verdad, that cemented the idea that, of the things I was just saying. For example, when I was like 8 years old and I saw the video of the Chicano moratorium for the first time. And I would always ask my dad that I wanted to see that video, and he didn't want to show it to me, because it's very impacting, brother, especially to a little kid. Finally, I saw it, and I remember being like, oh, wow, man, why do they treat us this way, Because, you're seeing the way the police are with you in real life and everyday life. The stories my dad told us about either, personal interactions or in the movimiento, because my dad was there at the Chicano moratorium, and he was one of the founders of the Untitled Chapter here in San Fernando, Pacoima. They were spied on by the LAPD and the San Fernando PD and the FBI. So there's all this stuff that you're learning, and it's not being, you're learning it from your family. You're learning it from compañeros that are like family. People in the community that were a part of it, or they lived through it, or they supported the Raza Unida. Regular people, not just activists, but regular people in the barrio, workers or homies or whatever, ¿verdad? So it's just a part of your life, it becomes a part of your life, and you expose a child to that, obviously you don't tell them, you expose them to what is adequate at the time, but you expose them to it because that's the truth. And I think our kids, our kids as in our people, in general, kids should be, but within our people, you have to expose them to that because then, somebody else is going to do that job for you, whether you like it or not. And that's how we get vendidos.
Yeah, dude, that's such a great point, and it leads me to just kind of wrapping up here. It's been really dope talking to y'all. Shout out to James Graham. Shout out to Char Darling, to Brewski, to Deborah. Love you, Deborah. Always watching and listening. Just kind of wrapping up here. I think you hit on something really key, Ernesto, that the immigrant rights movement, the migrant rights movement is so controlled by the Democrats especially coming out here to LA. Because, I'm born and raised in New York. In New York, I grew up with a lot of dope revolutionary communist migrant activists. One of my heroes in New York is this dude named Victor Torro, who is a Chilean guerrilla fighter with the MIR in Chile, the Movimiento de Izquierda Revolucionario, the radical leftist movement in Chile. He was a guerrilla fighter. He fought against Pinochet's troops. He had to flee the country. He went to Cuba, and then he came eventually to the Bronx. And he formed part of this organization called La Peña del Bronx, a migrant rights movement. To this day, man, he's old. Like he's pretty old now, but he's still going to all the marches of migrant rights. And he'll tell me straight up, he's like, I'll never go to the Democrat rallies, none of that shit, because they're the same people who overthrew my country and brought me here. So he's just on a next level of consciousness. And I felt like in New York, there was a lot of spaces for so many revolutionary communist immigrant rights movements from, not even just have to be communist, but just like non-Democrat, non-Republican. What advice do you have? Maybe we can start off with you, compañera Karena. What advice do you have for young Latinos or anyone of any age who wants to get involved with solidarity work for migrants, solidarity work with refugees and exiles, and be part of this movement, but without being controlled by the Democrats? Because we know that they got their tentacles in all sorts of NGOs and avenues. What advice would you have for people? Maybe Tele-Jaguar could be a good place to start.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think that, A good advice is, like you said, I've said many times, I think the Democratic Party is the biggest threat to our young people out there, because it's it's kind of like this it's the whole scam of the political system. It's that the Republicans come in and pass all these awful policies, and then the Democrats come in and instead of rescinding those policies, they further expand on them. And then what they actually do, so they're, the whole reason the Democrats exist is to keep Republican policies in power, really, because they just further expand and normalize them when they are in power. And so I think, understand any organization that is remaining or refuses to cut ties with the Democratic Party, stay away from them.
Yeah.
And that's with all these political organizations that claim to be representing the fictional progressive wing of a white supremacist party. It's extremely dangerous. And behind that are millions and probably billions of dollars that are put in to try to convince people of the opposite, by putting window dressings in like AOC, which, her purpose there is to use people's pain as her shield. And the same with Kamala Harris. It's more obscene when they do it because they are using people's pain as their shield as they are forwarding, advancing these policies of genocide and oppression and foreign intervention. And then once people get here, they're re-traumatizing them for profit. So I can't think of hardly anything more obscene than doing that and then coming here and re-traumatizing people for profit. But I always would say, whatever you get involved in, the focus should be building political power outside the duopoly. Start going to study groups with La Raza Unida Party. They hold study groups where they examine things like imperialism, capitalism, the harms of capitalism, everything. Join study groups of revolutionary groups. Stay away from anything that is even loosely affiliated with the Democratic Party. And, any organization at all. They're the only reason they're there is to serve as a smokescreen. And they're only there to attract progressive or radical energy by youth and then squash it once they've got you in their clutches. So it's, I would say, please look for ways to find grassroots groups that have absolutely no affiliation with the Democratic Party and are committed to firmly building independent political power outside of the duopoly. That would be my recommendation.
Most definitely. Facts. And I'm so glad you mentioned AOC, man. I was so disgusted when she took that picture in front of a parking lot, pretending to look at the kids locked up. And meanwhile, the reports and the images from other angles show that she was literally looking at a fucking parking lot, and she went there for her photo op to try to look all cute and everything. And it's just really disgusting. And you said it best. This is all a smokescreen. That's really good advice. What about you, compañero Matt? Any advice for people who want to get involved with the migrant solidarity movement that is independent of both the Democrats and the Republicans?
Well, it's kind of a broad kind of advice or broad kind of question. So, it's really important to remember that the Democratic Party is a kind of loyal opposition within the general duopoly. It is a loyal opposition within the general oppressive way of things, right? So it is a thing that's going to say that's wrong, but then continue it. Now, it's also important to remember that within the Democratic Party, there's a loyal opposition within the loyal opposition, and that includes AOC, that includes Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, I just saw today some 20-minute segment on how he's getting along with Joe Biden these days, right? So that's where Comrade Bernie has gone, right? And the screen kind of tethered a little bit, but I mean, for her, I mean, to me, the biggest thing was when she's chopping up the pineapple and talking about why Maduro must go. Really reminds me a lot of Hyman Roth in The Godfather Part 2.
The Godfather.
They're chopping up the cake of Cuba. I mean, I can never shake that image. But that's kind of what we're looking at here. So it's a little opposition with a little opposition. You got to avoid that at all costs, as Karena said. And I just want to leave one thing. So with understand that the United States of America actually loves certain refugees. They love Syrian refugees. They love Cuban refugees. They love Vietnamese refugees. They love refugees from the former Soviet bloc, which is not to say that they love Syrian people, which is not to say they love Cuban people, which is not to say they love Vietnamese people, which is not even to say they love Slavic people. What it's to say is they love quote unquote refugees, these kind of refugees, a lot. They love right wing refugees. They love people who are fleeing countries. They love Iranian refugees that were loyal to the Shah. They love all kinds of refugees. We're not saying they love Iranian people. They love these types of refugees coming from these places, not coming from these places, but coming from places where the United States is attacked and who were part of that attack and who the successful people, some proletarian force, threw them out. That's who they love. That's who they love. So we got to really understand that, and that's true of the Democrats, and that's true of the Republicans. And we oftentimes, not we here in this panel, but a lot of people share these kinds of politics. You know why? Because they're rooting for something. They're rooting for Team America. So they root for the Democrats, or they root for the Republicans because they're rooting for Team America. And you really got to break from that altogether. You really got to break from rooting for this kind of country altogether. It is a boil on the ass of the world. It is oppressing a lot of people within it. It's 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's prison population. It's fucking us up, and it is fucking up the rest of the world even worse. So we really got to understand that, and we really got to start really just breaking away from this type of thinking of wow, we got someone in Congress, we got someone in the Senate, we got someone. No, that individual person got themselves in the Congress, and they got them in the Senate, and they got there, and what they can do is the same thing as everyone else once they get to the Congress and Senate, which is fuck you up. So you have to understand that, you have to embrace that, and it sucks, and it's horrible, and it's a cruel, cruel reality. But you got to embrace reality so you can do something about it. So my advice about this question is the same advice about anything, which is that you first have to start by embracing reality, and then once you've done that, use your neurological skill, use your brain to figure out what you need to do. I can't tell you what to do. I don't know your life. I don't know where your capacities are. I don't know what you can do. I don't know who your friends are. I have no idea. You figure that out. The first thing I can tell you need to do is you need to knock off the bullshit. You need to get some sense. You need to figure out what's going on in the world today. And once you've done that, then you can figure out what you need to do and what you're capable of doing and what you should be doing. So,
man, I'm so glad you mentioned the double standards of migrants. I like to call them the red carpet migrants who get the royal treatment, the gusanos from Cuba, the escuálidos from Venezuela, the contras from Nicaragua, the Wahhabis from Syria, the anti-communists from the former Soviet countries. All these people, man, they get the nice 5-star treatment, the red carpet immigrants. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was at a TPS rally one time in solidarity with migrants. And obviously, there was a group of Haitians, Hondureños who were pushing for TPS, who were pushing. We're talking about the two poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere, Haiti and Honduras, that have been pillaged by imperialism, colonialism. And then at this rally, you have this white Venezuelan woman who's I'm just as oppressed. I'm a migrant. I'm dude, you were probably a fucking millionaire back in Venezuela. Your ancestors probably had a few enslaved people here and there, and it's just I'm so glad you mentioned that, because we have to make a class distinction within the quote unquote migrant rights movement about what immigrants and refugees are favored some over others, and Haitians and Hondurans and Mexicans, and we're seen as the bottom of the list. We're seen as the bottom of the barrel. But hey, we take that with pride. We're hard working class people. A lot of these gusanos and escuálidos from Venezuela and Cuba and the contras from Nicaragua, they're all trust fund babies. They all come from millionaire families. And I honestly don't give a fuck about them. They are anti-communist. They are pro, like you said, Matt, I think that was such a great way of saying it. They are on Team America, and America with 3 Ks. And so it's just a great way of putting that. Wrapping up with compañero Ernesto, your advice on how people can get involved with supporting the migrant rights movement independently of the two-party system.
Yeah, I would have to just, say ditto to what my compañero said, organize outside of the Democrats and the Republicans. If you see any Democrat coming into a meeting, that's the wrong place for you unless they're opposing this person. Stop. If a revolutionary, if someone that identifies or is a part of a revolutionary organization tells you something, most likely that person knows a lot more, and you should listen to that person. Stop making us say, I told you so. It's every 4 years or in between that in local elections, We say, we tell you something, and then we end up saying, I told you so. I told you so. I told you so. Stop making us say that. Be part of us, and tell other people, I told you so, and make that group grow, ¿verdad? Make that circle of people grow. Because that's how we're going to make change. Like compañera said, we build outside of that, and we build for power amongst the people. That's how you make any change. That's how any change has happened throughout history, is when people independently organize, and build power outside of whatever that may be, because that just saps us of power. We've seen it over and over again, how like the migrant rights movement that was so powerful in 2006, they sapped it down, they took it over. You had Villa Raigosa then having official marches and telling people to wave U.S. flags, put away the Mexican flag, put away the Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador flag, because you're scaring these people. Wear white. White is the color of surrender.
Right.
And people did that, and what happened to them on May Day? They were pummeled. You had people that lost their eyes. You had news reporters and journalists that were brutally beaten. Where were they? People were wearing white shirts and waving U.S. flags. What happened? It didn't stop the police from doing that or shooting tear gas. They still did it, and they crushed a lot of that movimiento. Then Obama came in, and that just, that was pretty much it for a long time. So stop making us say, I told you so, compañeros, compañeras, ¿verdad? Join us, don't join them. They slap you in the face all the time. Aren't you tired of it? Have a little dignity, ¿verdad?
Yeah.
Come over to the side of your people.
Dude, that's such a great point, man. I hear all the stories about 2006. I'm like, we got to get back to the point where we're all rocking red shirts and we got the flags of our countries instead of this U.S. flag and white shirt nonsense. And it reminds me of what you said, compañero Ernesto. It reminds me literally of an abusive relationship. I mean, it's like people are like with the Democrats, with our people and the Democrats. It's like, no, this time for real. This time for real, I know he has my back. No, this time for real, he has my back. Okay, he fucked me up again. No, this time for real, and it just over and over and over. And we have to get to a point where we have to turn to our people and be like, look, we're not going to find savior. We're not going to find liberty and freedom and true independence through this party. We have to part ways. And that's just what it's about. And it's really sad to see that. But I think that's exactly what the goal of Tele-Jaguar is doing an excellent job at that, at opening people up to alternatives, to third parties, to non-bipartisan options, to migrant solidarity, Chicano revolution, Latin American revolution. But on that note, compas, it was really dope talking to y'all. I had a great time, a blast speaking with y'all. You guys are like family to me. And hopefully out here in Cali, I mean, we're all out in LA County, so hopefully we can meet up sometime, maybe do something live. But it's really dope talking to y'all again. Episode 14, Unmasking Imperialism. Please go and support Tele-Jaguar, really dope media collective. Comrades, peace out. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.